Step into a spine-tingling journey of fear and endurance set within the eerie walls of an amusement park where darkness conceals far more than mere shadows. At 11 p.m., the amusement park gates open to welcome a small private party of just 40 guests, a sharp contrast to the usual throngs of thousands. As the head of security, I was on duty, working time and a half for this overnight lock-in, which would last until 8 a.m. The event marked a young man's 21st birthday and was the very first lock in the park had ever hosted. Though I appreciated the extra pay and the chance to spend the night close to Riley, the event's coordinator and my girlfriend, I couldn't shake my lasting unease about being in the park after dark. Stories had circulated for years, and over time, I'd witnessed subtle, inexplicable occurrences, whispers that seemed to rise from shadows, phantom screams echoing from the roller coasters, the prickling sensation of eyes watching me, and the eerie sound of footsteps scraping quietly behind me on empty pathways. These odd moments never convinced me of ghosts, but they unsettled me nonetheless. Despite my concerns, the birthday boy's millionaire father had paid handsomely to host the celebration, and it was my job to monitor the guests, ensuring responsible behavior, especially around alcohol. Although everyone was legally allowed to drink, I knew responsibility was not guaranteed. I'd be the one to intervene if things got out of hand. As the group of lively young adults entered the park, I braced myself for a long night ahead. Little did I know, the troubles that awaited us would be far worse than I anticipated. It was just past midnight when the atmosphere shifted ominously around the Titan roller coaster. Riley and I were stationed near the ride's exit, awaiting the birthday celebrants to finish their thrill. Suddenly, the lights illuminating the coaster flickered and went out for a solid 5 seconds as the train looped around. Riley's voice broke the uneasy silence. "That was weird," she said with a mix of curiosity and concern. I frowned, knowing this had never happened before. Then the screams pierced the night, but they weren't the usual excited yells of joy. Instead, they carried a manic, panicked edge that sent chills down my spine. The train slowed as it returned to the station, but when I glanced at one of the riders, a young man seated midway down the train, his face was splattered with blood. He gasped for help, the scene unfolding into chaos. Riley and I rushed up the stairs just as the ride operator, an 18-year-old named Shell, looked stricken with fear. At the platform, my breath caught in horror. Next to that young man, the girl had suffered a grotesque injury. Her face was nearly obliterated, a gruesome canvas of torn muscles and exposed tendons. Her freckled skin was gone, replaced by a grotesque mess. As she desperately clawed at her companion, screaming in agony, the boy struggled to escape her grip but remained trapped by the coaster's safety harness, his own screams mingling with those of nearby riders who had witnessed the bloodshed. I stared at the deep wounds on her scalp, gouges that appeared as if claws had raked through her skin while the ride barreled along. It was impossible. All rides had been thoroughly inspected before the event. Suddenly, the chilling tales the former manager had once whispered came rushing back, sinking my stomach into a void of dread. Despite the horror, training took over. I grabbed my radio, urgently calling for paramedics. As the injured girl's harness was released, the crowd erupted into panic, some filming the nightmare, even as I tried to maintain control and order. The young man managed to break free and struggled to explain what had happened. He spoke of a woman, but not a normal one, a horrifying figure who had attacked, clawing ferociously and smiling with a twisted grin, leaving the scars freshly etched on the victim's scalp. I shouted to disperse the crowd. "Party's over. Everyone out of the park now." Aleem, the park manager, arrived amidst the chaos, face glistening with sweat. The ambulance was en route, yet my mind raced with uncertainty about the strange and violent forces at work after dark in this place. As the night spiraled into chaos, an eerie moment unfolded that would forever unsettle me. Among the terrified guests and frantic staff, I caught sight of a bizarre figure moving through the shadows, a woman twisted and grotesque, almost unrecognizable in her mutilated state. Her stringy, dark hair hung over her face, cloaked in tattered clothing stained with dry blood, dragging along an unconscious girl by the hair. The surreal image was like something ripped from a nightmare. It was all too real. My instincts screamed at me to act, but the fear of the supernatural made my mind reel. This wasn't just any attacker. This was the very spirit the old manager, Gregory, had muttered about in his drunken tales, an angry ghost bound to the park by tragic past. I recalled his warnings, stories I had once dismissed as fanciful ramblings. Compelled to save the girl from this malevolent entity, I pursued them through the eerie hum of the bumper cars, narrowly avoiding the rides, speeding vehicles that seemed to move with unnatural speed. I cornered the woman as she snarled at me with horrifically distorted eyes filled with pain and rage. The encounter defied all logic, forcing me to confront the chilling reality of what haunted the park and what I now had to face in this surreal nightmare. As chaos engulfed the amusement park that night, I found myself facing the unthinkable. The disfigured woman, the spirit Gregory had warned me about, was no mere ghost. She was something far more terrifying and real. She had snatched an unconscious girl, dragging her mercilessly through the darkness, blood trailing behind like a grim signature. I bolted after them, adrenaline surging through every fiber of my being. When I caught up, I yelled at her to stop, but her distorted eyes locked onto me with chilling intent. With my baton and flashlight gripped tightly, I braced for the fight I never thought I'd have to face. She lunged, claws flashing and still dripping with blood, raking my forearm before I could react. But I pushed through the pain, landing punches and baton strikes to her mangled skull, determined to save the girl. And in the nightmare, each blow felt real. She faltered, collapsing to her knees under my relentless assault. Yet, just as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished. Nothing left but a dented patch of concrete where I'd struck her. Despite this surreal moment, the girl remained unconscious and vulnerable. This brutal confrontation was more than a desperate battle. It was a fight for survival against a spirit forged from tragedy and rage, a spirit tethered irrevocably to the park's dark past. I knew then that escaping this night alive meant confronting horrors that refused to stay buried, no matter how much I wished they would. As a roller coaster began its steep ascent into the darkest tunnel, I did what I had no choice but to do. The chilling sound of grinding gears echoed around me as the ride's mechanisms cruelly tore into the young woman's body that I had desperately tried to save. The horrifying crunch of bone and the sickening squelch of ruptured organs seared themselves into my memory, sounds that would haunt me forever. When the ride came to a stop and the lights throughout the park flickered back on, the gruesome sight of the two now lifeless mascot costumes on the station floor confirmed that the nightmare had been temporarily halted. Riley, sitting only a few rows behind me, reached for my hand, her eyes wide with shock, halting as she noticed the young woman was no longer in her seat. Our gazes locked, and I silently conveyed through that stare the terrible sacrifice I had made to save the others, an act that was necessary yet devastating. As we gathered the remaining guests and employees to evacuate the park, relief washed over me that no further attacks or supernatural disturbances occurred that night. But in the days that followed, I sensed a profound change in Riley. The bond we'd shared began to unravel. 2 weeks later, she ended our relationship. Though it pained me deeply, I understood her distance. The horrifying choice I made weighed heavily not only on my conscience, but on what we had together. In the end, I had paid an agonizing personal price to put an end to the vengeful spirit's terror, yet the threat remained unresolved. The dark force merely lay dormant, appeased for now by the sacrifice. I vowed then to keep the park closed after dark as long as I could, but I fear that years from now, new people in charge might dismiss my warnings as the ravings of a madman, and the cycle could begin again. The consequences of that night redefined everything. The haunting I once doubted had become a brutal reality, and I alone bore the burden of deciding how much I was willing to sacrifice to protect others. I still can't believe I actually bought this place without telling Rachel. As we pulled up outside the abandoned theme park, she exclaimed, "You were supposed to keep me blindfolded." But after 12 years together, I knew exactly how she'd react, and true to form, she ignored my comment and stared out the windshield as I cut off the engine. The headlights faded, leaving only the dim night to outline the park looming before us like a graveyard. Beyond a locked chain-link gate, the roller coaster tracks resembled massive spines, while the buildings and structures looked like carcasses or tombstones. "How much did it cost?" she asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and resentment. "It's a solid investment," I replied evenly. "Remember all those times we talked about saving up for something meaningful? This is it." She scoffed and shook her head. "I just wish you had told me first. It wouldn't have been such a surprise." I shrugged. "I thought you'd be excited. I bought us a haunted theme park." Rachel rolled her eyes. "You don't actually believe in that stuff." "I don't, but you do. That's why I figured we could use your expertise in ghosts and goblins to turn this into the country's premier haunted attraction. Of course, after we fix all the problems that led to those terrible accidents." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't believe it, but it's fun, and it makes me feel okay about death, like there's something after this life." "I know," I said, reaching over to hold her hand through the gloom inside the truck. "You serious? You want to do this together?" I nodded, but then headlights appeared behind us, suddenly brightening the cab of our vehicle. Rachel's smile faded instantly as she recognized the approaching SUV. Her expression went from hopeful to nearly consumed by fear. As the headlights shifted away, her face was cast back into darkness. When I finally looked at her again, she stood outside the truck beside Mark, my stepbrother's Ford. She had regained her composure and smiled warmly as she greeted him. "Holy hell, you really did it, didn't you?" Mark exclaimed, rushing around to pull me into a hug. "I sure did, you crazy bastard," I said, returning the embrace. After an awkward one-armed hug and some mumbled greetings, I pulled out the keys to the locked gate. "Well then," I said, "shall we?" The park itself was on the smaller side, the only way I could have afforded it, resting on a lakeside lot in the heart of a struggling Appalachian town. Mystic Bay Park was steeped in history, not all of it good. The horrific fire that forced its recent closure was part of the reason it was available. As we moved past the boarded-up box office and down the park's central aisle, Rachel nervously asked, "Don't the lights work? It's so dark. I have an appointment to restore power on Monday." I told her, "But feel free to use your phone's flashlight." Their feeble beams flickered to life as they followed behind me. Remnants of summers past flooded my mind. I recalled how, as a kid, I'd spent countless hours here, riding all the major attractions in just a few hours. But everything had changed after my parents' divorce, and when my mom remarried Mark's dad, moving us far away. The park always held a place in my heart, though. Without waiting, I veered toward a narrow alley wedge between a restroom and a cafe. Rachel hesitated. "Can't we do this during the day?" "Come on," I urged. "I just want to explore a bit. If there are any ghosts, I bet they're near the Fright House. And there'll be construction during the day, so this is our chance." She glanced at Mark uncertainly, but he smiled and shrugged. "Fine, just half an hour," she relented. "But not near where the fire happened. All those poor people. That's on the other side of the park. They cleared it out. Nothing remains but an empty dirt patch." I reassured her. Still, a chill ran down my spine as I slipped away into the shadowed alley. Suddenly, Rachel cried out from behind. I asked, "What? Did you hear something?" Mark responded, "Yeah. It sounded like something scratching on the other side of the wall." Rachel echoed, "Something frantic and big." I shook my head. "Probably just a cat or rodents." As we emerged from the alley, the familiar sight of the Fright House lay ahead, nestled between the bumper cars and Tilt-A-Whirl. I led the way up the ramp, past the podium where employees would prevent patrons from entering too early, letting animatronics and effects reset. Fake plastic strips, stained with fake blood, hung across the entryway. Just as I remembered, a tickle of nervous excitement crept over me. This haunted house had scared me silly as a kid, even though I knew all the tricks. Mark asked skeptically, "What's the point now? The power's off. Nothing will work. I just want to see if it's still the same," I said. "Come on." Rachel was already glancing over her shoulder, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Concerned, I asked, "What's wrong?" "There are kids in here," she whispered. "I swear, I saw someone running somewhere ahead." "Did you see?" Mark shook his head. "No, nothing." I laughed nervously. The park's surrounded by barbed wire, and I locked the gate. "We're definitely the only ones here." I gave her a teasing smile. "Maybe it's a ghost." Her stare made me back off. "Okay, not a ghost, but probably kids playing around." We stepped through the hanging strips and into a room filled with doll heads, all staring eerily at me. To get across, I had to circle an oversized eerie doll on a rocking chair. I remembered how, when you passed, the chair would suddenly rock and screams blared through speakers. Nothing happened this time. We moved on through the clown-themed room, and then a room filled with coffins set as a labyrinth on the floor. Rachel sighed in relief. "Good thing the power's out." Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the clown room behind us. We all froze and turned. One coffin lid twitched violently, then settled back down. Rachel screamed and clung to Mark. After a pause, she pulled free and reached for my hand. "There are kids in here messing with us." My heart pounded. "Who's there?" No answer. We tried to continue, but the flashlight beam illuminated something moving. Mark approached a coffin, and suddenly a burned arm lunged up, grabbing him by the shirt and tugging hard. He dropped his phone, gripping the edge of the coffin just enough to avoid being pulled under. His muffled shouts echoed as Rachel screamed to me to help. I pulled him free, and as he collapsed, I gasped at his face. A mess of torn flesh and gouged eyes, blood streaming from a neck wound. Rachel screamed behind me. Mark opened his mouth, but only blood came out before he went still. Another thud came from the clown room. I stepped back as Rachel yelled for me to run. We dashed deeper into the Fright House, pushing through the witch-themed room and then the butcher-themed room. But as we reached the next area, filled with dozens of human-shaped figures draped in black and white sheets, we froze. I shone Rachel's flashlight beam around this forest of ghostly mannequins, many of which suddenly twitched or charged toward us. She clung to me, claws digging into my arm as we dodged figures clad in black robes who brandished knives. Rachel tried to fight back, but was quickly overwhelmed, stabbed in the arm, and then killed by 3 cloaked men. As she died, I stood frozen, the flashlight illuminating her lifeless hand clutching the phone. The men revealed their faces, strangers with mockery in their voices, accusing Rachel of infidelity, then ordered me to clean up their mess. I retreated to the butcher room and pulled out a concealed handgun. Without hesitation, I fired, taking down 3 attackers in seconds before shooting wildly to create the illusion I'd been defending myself. I stabbed myself in the abdomen and forearm to simulate defensive wounds, then grabbed Rachel's phone to call 911, planning on weaving a tale to escape punishment. The whole charade was worth it to eliminate those traitorous scumbags. But beneath it all, the park's haunted past still clung to every creak and shadow, and the dangers we awakened were far from over. The second story unfolds on a tense night as I arrive with Rachel and Mark at the abandoned Mystic Bay Park. Rachel, clearly upset that I bought the park without telling her, gazes out the windshield as the dark, lifeless theme park looms before us like a forgotten graveyard. The roller coaster tracks stretch out like giant ribs, while the buildings stand as hollow carcasses. Despite her frustration, I assure her it's a solid investment. One I can afford because the park recently shut down after a tragic fire. A dark history that now becomes our challenge. We step past the locked gate into the eerie silence, our only light coming from our phone flashlights, casting weak pools of glow onto the faded concession stands and empty souvenir shops lining the central aisle. The towering roller coaster looms to the right, the Ferris wheel to the left, and memories flood in of carefree childhood summers spent here before life changed. I lead Rachel and Mark down a narrow alleyway between a restroom and a cafe, recalling that it exits near the Fright House. Rachel pleads to wait until daylight, but I insist we explore now before the park begins daytime repairs. As we press on, an unsettling scratching echoes along the restroom wall. Rachel and Mark both hear it, describing frantic, heavy noises, but I dismiss it as rodents or stray cats. Shortly after, we enter the Fright House, where faded hanging plastic strips, tinted with fake blood, whisper memories of past scares. Amidst the childhood nostalgia, something feels off. Rachel mentions glimpsing movement, shadows of children running inside, and her unease mounts. Inside the Fright House's doll-filled room, the eerie silence is punctuated only by the memories of animatronics that once worked, though tonight's darkness muffles their horrors. As we move in her rooms, themed with clowns and coffins, a sudden thud startles us. A coffin lid nearby twitches as if something or someone lurks beneath, heightening Rachel's anxiety. She holds tightly to my hand, convinced there are children playing pranks inside, but the dark feeling deepens. Mark approaches a coffin, reluctantly lifting its lid only to uncover a hydraulic column beneath, until a charred arm suddenly bursts through, grabbing his shirt and dragging him toward a dark hole in the floor. His phone drops as he struggles to pull himself out. Rachel and I rush to help, gripping his clothes and hauling him back, only to confront a horrifying sight. Mark's face is ripped and bleeding, his eyes gouged, the wounds pulsing with life before he collapses dead before us. The supernatural terror escalates as heavy footsteps close in from behind, breathing growls chasing us deeper into the Fright House. We race through the witch and butcher-themed rooms, pursued relentlessly by unseen, relentless figures. When we enter a vast room crowded with human-shaped mannequins draped in black and white sheets, the haunting escalates. Figures nearby begin to twitch, then dash at us with knives drawn, forcing us into a desperate fight for survival. Rachel's scream pierces the chaos as she fights back fiercely, but the attackers overpower her, stabbing her repeatedly to death, just as I had orchestrated. In the chilling aftermath, the assailants reveal themselves. Cloaked men who coldly discuss Rachel's betrayal before one of them slips away under my determined gaze. Left alone in the dark horror of the Fright House, the air thick with death and betrayal, I draw my handgun and execute the attackers in a desperate bid for survival, then stage wounds on myself to mask the truth. Clutching Rachel's phone, I steel myself to make the next call for help, the haunted park's darkness closing it around us. Story 3, The Murderous Mascot. I slipped into the lumberjack costume, the helmet sliding down over my head, and suddenly a cold wave of claustrophobia washed over me, a bizarre sensation for someone unbothered by confined spaces. This was my first day wearing the Mac, the lumberjack mascot suit, the park's main character known for its jovial, bearded face, featured on all the marketing materials. The park's theme revolves around lumberjacks and forest creatures, with attractions like log rides, wooden roller coasters, and axe-throwing games. The job paid well above average for mascot work, so I had packed up my things and moved to the Pacific Northwest to take it. Still, as the costume settled over me, an overwhelming dread pressed down, urging me to rip it off and toss it away. Focusing on my breathing, I looked through the mesh screen shaped like a smile on a lumberjack's mouth. Memories flashed rapidly in my mind. Images of blood, severed body parts, and violence blurring together before fading like a fading nightmare. Battling the panic, I sat on the locker room bench. Bobby, dressed as Bucky the Beaver, the mascot's rival, was nearby. He was new too, and I'd been giving him tips during our training. He noticed my distress and asked if I was all right. I assured him I was fine, though my mind reeled. The locker room clock neared opening time, so I headed outside, trying to shake off the disturbing visions. Later, when I was alone, my mind wandered back to a disturbing hallucination, the vivid memory of raising my axe over my sleeping wife, swinging it down, the gory sounds of flesh and bone being torn. I saw the woman's shocked eyes, the gash in her neck, her startled scream cut short by a second swing of the axe. Then there were two boys in the hall, the family I never had, watching me with confused eyes. The horror of this unreal scene left me shaken. Suddenly, snapping back, I realized I was still in the park, wearing the costume during my shift. Two children stood in front of me, the same kids from my vision. One was crying, and her father charged forward, enraged, accusing me of striking his child with my foam axe. The woman's wife immediately shielded the kids. The man was furious, but I had no words. My mind was still spinning from the hallucination. I turned away, dry heaving. Later in the locker room, Bobby returned, concerned. He asked if I'd been fired. I shook my head. I admitted the terrifying vision and said I felt something deeply wrong inside my head was happening. Bobby's face paled as he shared a chilling secret. The last man to wear the Mac costume killed his entire family with an axe, and the man before that had also met a violent end. He warned me no one wanted to wear the costume after those tragedies. A shiver ran through me. What if those visions were more than just hallucinations? Before I could contemplate further, Tony, the park boss, stormed in, ordering Bobby back to work and me to join him in apologizing to the family I'd upset. I took off the costume and followed him, feeling shaken and unsure of what was real. That night, walking my dog Xenia, I researched the stories Bobby had hinted at. I found a news article confirming that Dale Young, the man who had murdered his wife and two sons, had taken his life shortly after. Another man, Martin Zimmerman, who had also worn the Mac costume, had died by apparent suicide on the park grounds, surrounded by rumors of ritualistic undertones and unsolved murders. The costume seemed to embody a dark legacy of violence and despair. Determined to understand, I called Tony asking about the costume's past. He brushed it off, telling me it was just a piece of fabric and I shouldn't blame my behavior on dead men. His dismissiveness unnerved me. Returning to the park after hours with Xenia, I sought to destroy the costume, but when I opened a locker, it was gone. Instead, a strange black duffel bag lay there. Then, unexpectedly, Mac the lumberjack appeared at the end of the lockers, axe in hand, but it was no longer foam. It was a real, gleaming blade. The mascot advanced, swinging fiercely. I grabbed Xenia to protect her as I backed away. The axe swung dangerously close to my face. I tried to escape, heading for the employee-only gate, but Mac the lumberjack followed, moving unnaturally fast. Just as I reached safety, a security guard appeared, confused by the commotion, but Mac turned, and in one horrifying sweep, he cleaved the guard's head in two, sending blood spraying across the darkness. Xenia lunged at the attacker, biting fiercely as I struggled with Mac over the axe. I managed to wrench the weapon free and struck the mascot's head repeatedly, finally knocking the helmet off and revealing Tony, my boss, lying unconscious, securing his hands with flex cuffs from the fallen guard. I doused the costume in lighter fluid and set it ablaze. Flames eagerly consumed the flannel shirt, overalls, and fake boots, the very garment worn by a serial killer. Tony suddenly awoke, screaming madly as he threw himself onto the burning costume, trying to smother the flames with his bound hands. But it was futile, and he caught fire, his screams turning into gurgles. I quickly grabbed the extinguisher and put out the fire, but I knew it was too late to save him. Sit with my dog, I was haunted by flashes of that terrible hallucination once again. A horrid euphoria mingled with sanguine images I wished I could forget. Zania looked up at me and, somehow, seemed to wink. The curse within the Mac costume and the deadly past it carried had claimed another victim, the murderous mascot. As I lowered the lumberjack head onto my own, a sudden wave of claustrophobia washed over me, breaking out in a cold sweat. This was unusual. Enclosed spaces never bothered me before. I had spent many days portraying a mascot at another amusement park. Recruited for this new job, which offered an exceptional salary, I had packed up my belongings and my dog, relocating to the Pacific Northwest. Still, in those initial moments inside the costume, an overwhelming dread settled deep within me, urging me to rip off the mascot head and discard it. To regain composure, I focused on my breathing and peered through the curved mesh smile of the lumberjack's mouth. The only viewport. The character I embodied was Mac the Lumberjack, the park's iconic mascot, his bearded, cartoonish face emblazoned on all promotional materials and billboards. The park itself embraced a lumberjack theme, complete with log rides, wooden roller coasters, axe-throwing attractions, and plush toys of forest creatures for prizes. I reminded myself that this was a big opportunity. I couldn't afford to falter on my first day as Mac. The park was about to open, and my role was to bring joy and laughter, pose for pictures, and wield my cartoon-like axe in harmless ways. Several faux tree stations awaited, where children could try their hand at chopping down foam trees, triggering them to fall after a few cuts using a remote control I carried. These moments never failed to delight both kids and their smiling parents. It's just nerves, I reassured myself. Suddenly, a flood of horrific images swept through my mind like a whirlwind, blood, severed body parts, though they blended together in a blur. Staggering, I collapsed onto the locker room bench. "Are you okay?" came a voice from nearby. Turning, I saw Bobby, the young man cast as Bucky the Beaver, Mac's supposed nemesis. He was new to mascot work, and I'd been training him. Bobby had apparently been in the locker room for some time before I noticed him. He reached out a plush hand, helping me to my feet. "Good luck out there," he said. "You too. Remember to take breaks and drink plenty of water. It's supposed to be hot today." Bobby smiled as I stood, the clock signaling opening time. Outside the locker room, my mind wrestled with the haunting visions. Soon, those thoughts were pierced by the sight of my sleeping wife in our dark bedroom, lying peacefully on her side. The cold handle of the axe felt familiar in my hands. Her auburn hair framed her serene face, and her steady breathing, once a source of comfort, now grated on me, fueling an intense anger. The division between me and this body I inhabited blurred. Sometimes I felt apart from this life. Why should she be allowed to live so blissfully? Why any of them? I hadn't given permission for this existence. If I had no say in a world's creation, I certainly had a say in its end. Raising the axe above her neck, I smiled, anticipating the moment. The sudden rush of ecstasy sent shivers through me. I swung the axe down, blood splatter in my face. Her eyes snapped open. She turned on her back, mouth opening in a scream as the gash bloomed across her neck. Before sound escaped, I struck her face with the axe, crushing it brutally. A violent shiver rocked me. For a fleeting moment, I detached from this body and house, and those children I never had. Here I had no wife or kids. The images blurred and vanished as quickly as they came. A sharp noise down the hall redirected me. Two young boys, around 6 and 7 years old, stood sleepily in the hallway. Blood dripped from the axe with a soft, rhythmic thudding. Both looked at me confused. One called out, "Daddy." I swung the axe at them, but the blade bounced harmlessly off the foam head of the bigger boy. Suddenly, I was back in the park, still in costume, confronted by the real children in front of me. The boy I had just struck started to cry. His father stormed forward, face flushed with rage, shoving me to the ground. "You hit my kid," he barked, looming over me. His wife rushed to protect their children, wrapping them in her arms. Silent with shock, I turned away, stomach twisting at the memory of the hallucination. I vomited a mix of Gatorade and tuna sandwich in a mascot head. The father demanded to speak with my manager, still seething. Later, back in a locker room, Bobby emerged from his beaver costume and asked anxiously, "Dude, what happened? Did you get fired?" "I'm fine," I muttered, voice heavy. I don't know what came over me. It was like I was somewhere else. "I think I need help." Bobby studied me, his pale face reflecting concern. "Do you know what happened to the last guy who wore that costume?" "No, I moved here recently. Thought someone liked my act. No one wants to wear that suit. Not after what happened to him." "What happened?" "He killed his entire family with an axe," Bobby said quietly. "Had only been here a couple weeks." The blood drained from my face. How could he know what I just seen? Before I could respond, Tony, my boss, burst in, ordering Bobby out and demanding I come with him to apologize to the angry guests. Outside the park, walking my dog Xenia under the night sky, I searched for stories about amusement park worker murders. One headline stopped me cold: a family portrait of the auburn-haired woman, 2 young boys, and a dark-haired man named Dale Young. The article recounted Dale's murder of his family, followed by his own suicide, and the recent mysterious suicide of Martin Zimmerman, the previous Mac the lumberjack, whose costume was found hanging above his body. I called Tony, asking if the costume I wore today was the same one from those tragic events. He laughed it off, reminding me it was just a costume, a piece of cloth. But as I entered the darkened park locker room later, backpack in hand, ready to burn that cursed suit, I discovered the Mac costume missing. A strange duffel bag lay where it should have been. Suddenly, Mac the lumberjack himself stood in the shadows, wielding a real axe. I backed away as the figure advanced, axe swinging dangerously close to my face. My dog Xenia barked fiercely, but I pulled her back, fearing for her safety. The axe swung again. I dodged but inhaled the fear gripping me. The chase ended with me escaping through a gate into the night, but a security guard wasn't so lucky. Mac appeared behind him, cleaving his head in two. The gruesome sight froze me. Xenia lunged at Mac, who seemed unfazed by the attack. I wrestled with the axe until I finally struck Mac's head, the foam softening the blow. The head fell off, revealing Tony, unconscious. With no time to hesitate, I bound Tony's hands with the dead guard's flex cuffs, doused the costume with lighter fluid, and set it ablaze. As flames consumed the shirt, overalls, and boots, one costume connected to a serial killer, Tony awoke, panicked, and screaming before rolling on the fire. I scrambled for the extinguisher and put out the blaze, but it was too late for Tony. The costume would never be worn again. Sitting beside my dog, haunted by vivid, disturbing images and the disturbing thrill they brought, I felt a mixture of revulsion and fascination. Xenia looked at me knowingly, as if she understood the darkness lingering within me. The auditorium of the amusement park fell silent as the horror unfolded. The protagonist found himself trapped in a relentless nightmare, where his choices had irrevocably altered his fate. After the violent confrontation with the ghostly woman, the spirit's wrath seemed only momentarily appeased, hinting at a darkness that refused to be subdued. His battle against the supernatural forces had left scars, both physical and emotional, compounded by the painful estrangement from Riley. Yet, more disturbing was the creeping sense that the malevolent presence lingering in the park was far from defeated. The spirit's vengeful history was intertwined with the very foundation of the amusement park, its legacy reaching deeply into the shadows that cloaked the rides after dark. As the days turned into weeks, the protagonist grappled with memories that haunted him as persistently as the specter. The unseen hand of the ghostly woman seemed to shape his reality, eroding his grasp on sanity. The lingering question remained: was his fate sealed by the choices he had made, or is he merely a pawn caught in the eternal cycle of the park's dark past? The haunting had become inseparable from his life, a grim reminder that some forces, once awakened, refused to rest peacefully. The park, shrouded in darkness when the sun set, stood as a silent warning that certain horrors are destined to repeat, and the past, no matter how deeply buried, will inevitably resurface. As night falls over the amusement park, the haunting echoes of unspoken terrors and blood-soaked memories linger relentlessly, proving that some past horrors refuse to remain hidden. These chilling tales stand as stark reminders and grave warnings for anyone brave enough to awaken the darkness lurking beneath the surface. If you found yourself captivated by this terrifying journey through the shadows of the amusement park, be sure to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Your support helps bring more chilling tales from the dark to life, keeping the stories alive and the scares coming.